Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome everyone to this year's FSD lecture on financial inclusion. All protocols observed. What a wonderful phrase that is. It instantly lets me off the hook for any social gaffe I may have made unwittingly. I'm going to keep this very short. I have just enough social awareness to realize that several hundred people have not turned out on a Thursday evening and braving Nairobi's traffic in order to listen to me. So I will try and keep my comments as quickly as possible and get to the main event. For the many of you I have not met yet, I'm David Ferrand. I'm the director of FSD Kenya, and you are, as I said, very welcome here. For the many of you whom I'm privileged to have already met and know, Karibu Rafiki. Now this lecture is coming in the year of the 10th anniversary of the global financial crisis. The events of a decade ago remind us of the perils of hubris. The financial sector can and should be a significant tool for empowering our economies and societies. But, misdirected, it can cause enormous harm economically and socially, and most especially for the poorest in our societies. I think this is an important warning for us to think about as we consider where Kenya's financial sector is developing, and which, for those of you who attended last year's annual lecture, was covered by Professor John Kay, in which he underlined some of the perils of unfettered financial market development. The UK's Department for International Development established FSD Kenya some 17 years ago to support the development of inclusive financial markets in Kenya. And our ambition is simple. Is to see sustainable improvements in the lives of lower income people in Kenya. And we think that a major contribution can be made to that ambition by developing a financial system which delivers real value to low income people. And today the Gates Foundation and Swedish International Development Agency continue to support this work. Now, in the time since FSD started its program, enormous progress has been made by the financial sector in Kenya. Today, the prospect of full financial access is now well within reach, and that's an extraordinary achievement. But when we look at what that means in concrete terms for ordinary Kenyans, some degree of modesty is required. Many of the newly financially included make very little use of the various accounts and wallets that they've opened and have had correspondingly relatively limited impact on their lives. In seeking to create a truly inclusive financial system, if you'll forgive my using a much overused Churchillian quote, now this is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. Which brings me finally to this evening's lecture, which is all about looking to the future. I'm not going to be foolhardy enough to attempt to make too many conjectures about the future. However, what I am prepared to venture is that to achieve the promise of inclusive finance, we need to change the financial system radically. And I'm also willing to suggest that financial technology, Fintech, offers us the best opportunity to bring about the far-reaching change in the financial system needed. This evening's lecturer, Julian Kyula, is in the vanguard of those who promise to lead the disruption we need. Much has been talked in Kenya about the Silicon Savannah, and inevitably there is a degree of hyperbole in such notions. And the UK, for example, has laid claim to its Silicon Glen, the Silicon Fen, and rather less romantically, the Silicon Roundabout. However, Julian is the real deal. I've been lucky enough to know Julian since he was actually a very young man. His father, Joe, who I'm delighted to see here in the audience tonight, we worked together in commercial banking, and I remember him being quite concerned about Julian's interest at the time in a career in aviation. Was it really the right direction to go? Well, clearly, Joe didn't need to worry. After Julian's early career working in credit and technology in the US and Kenya, Julian became an outstanding business and social entrepreneur. His interests span an extraordinary range from finance and technology through to agriculture and the church. In 2010, Julian started Mobile Decisioning, or MODE, in Nairobi. Within 8 years, when Julian exited, he had established MODE as a leading global provider of airtime credit operating in more than 20 countries, disbursing more than 6 million loans per day and lending more than $800 million last year. So, as we look to the future of finance, I can think of no one better to help us see where we could be going than Julian. Julian, the floor is yours. And while Julian comes up, can I remind those of you who tweet that the hashtag is hashtag FSD Lecture. Thank you.
Well, good evening. I'm very humbled to be speaking to you. The first time Joyce asked me to do this and just said, we've been thinking that you should come and do this, I laughed, and then I looked at her, she wasn't laughing, and then I realized you guys are serious. Is this a lapel? Do you want me to wear it? Oh, okay. So I realized she wasn't laughing, and I went home wondering, what are the guys at FSD smoking to take a risk of inviting some of us to something like this. But I'm excited tonight to see fellow colleagues in the market, those who are in Fintech and those who've built these companies, sold them, trashed them, built them again. I'm glad to see so many of you in the room. Let's keep fighting, guys. And let's see if tonight I make a little bit of sense. If I do, I'll judge by the clap when I'm done, or the lack of. But I'm excited tonight to be here. And to David, thank you very much for allowing me to do this. The FSD team is very close to me. Interestingly, I've had an experience with every one of you. So Tamara, who's sitting there, was very responsible when I started MODE for just helping me navigate some amazing ground, and eventually got me to meet Bill and Melinda Gates in Seattle, and I just spent an awesome afternoon with them discussing telephone terms that I have no idea what they were saying. They are one smart couple, but it was an amazing time. And I saw James Kashangaki, and James was one of the key people when we were starting credit bureaus in Kenya when I first came back, and FSD was very involved then. So just to the whole FSD team, thank you very much. But unlike other places I speak at where I go over time, let me start my clock so that I can finish on time and hopefully be invited again. It was good to see all of you. Let me start by talking about the subject on the screen. I think I've earned a little bit of a right to talk about Fintech. Been through a few interesting hoops over the last 10 years. The first company which I sold was involved in some level of Fintech here in Kenya. The second company which I exited recently has been an amazing rush, I must be honest with you. The third one which I'm starting is a debate between my wife and I on whether I'm crazy, officially crazy, because she can't believe I'm jumping back into that pool again. But it's in the blood. I can't help myself. So I think I'll talk about Fintech tonight with a lot of pride, but at the same time with a lot of information, some research. So pretty big market. Fintech is not a small market, and I want to describe Fintech to those of you who don't understand it. It's basically finance and technology, and going into it digitally. So our digital focus has been in finance and technology. And Mode, what we started by doing was to just simply lend people airtime, what most of you may call Okoa Jahazi here, or Copper Credo. Copper Credo was us. We took it to many countries, morphed into something else. And I'm seeing former employees turned wealthy here and who went to work elsewhere or build something else. So it's great to see everyone here tonight. But there are major shifts. There are major shifts in consumer expectations, in digital buying options, in product relevance. So whichever industry you find yourself playing in, this market called Fintech is big. It's a disruption. It's causing disruption in many areas. But I do want to point out that there are some things, and I'm glad that, David and team chose to invite an African this time to talk about how we view things from here, but we also have to look out there to see how they're looking at us. And so I did road shows in West Coast, US. I did road shows in East Coast. We did road shows in London, and we did road shows in the Middle East. If any of you is starting a Fintech, please see me privately after this to tell you some areas you should never bother doing road shows for Fintech. Use my experience to not bother with it. But let me give you an idea of the global Fintech understanding. In Q3 2018, that's this quarter we've just come out of, $5.64 billion worth of deals was done, Fintech deals, right? This quarter alone. That's 375 deals. You can do the math to find out what average deals look like. As you can see, again, according to CB Insights, Fintechs across the world, the top 30 Fintechs, 250 unicorns, are valued at $252 billion. And if you see the little flags everywhere, there's a continent missing any flag. But you can see what happens in North America, Europe, in South America. I think Nubank has done one of the most amazing deals in Brazil. And you can see what's happening in Asia. I want to talk tonight about why is Africa blank. We have a lot of activity going on. We have a lot of excitement. We have a lot of setup. And we have a lot of talk about M-pesa. But no one's making money from that the way it should be made. And so I want to kind of dive into some thoughts tonight. I'm not saying what I've put together is what it is, but I'm on the microphone and you have to listen. So let's talk about startups. I look at startups as experiments, right? Experiments go good or experiments go bad. No big deal. I think there's a lot of emotional quotient put into startups. A lot of us put a lot of EQ into it. And by the time we're done, burnt out, depressed. I was just sharing in Nigeria, for instance. I have friends who, when Kenya started doing M-pesa and M-pesa started growing, the licensing regime in Nigeria allowed mobile wallets. But the banking infrastructure and the banking industry and the bank guys in Nigeria came together and basically said, M-pesa will never happen in Nigeria. And so people who invested millions of dollars in anticipation are still waiting today. 20 wallets were licensed at that time. I don't know how many more have been licensed since. But none of them has taken off. So certain nuances that come up in our continent. But I do want to break the barrier of continental thinking tonight and just be able to help you understand how we were able to go into places we never thought we would. As I speak to you, Mode is now a respected company in Indonesia, in the Philippines, out in Myanmar. I remember landing in Myanmar and I was at the airport and then we went through the mall and there was this kid. I kept wondering, why is everyone staring at me? And I realized there are not many of us there. I was probably one of the few, and one child just stopped and hid behind his mom's skirt and watched me passing and pulled a skirt and said, "Look at that." And I realized this is a market we must get into. I can easily be a fan here. I can start a few things. But anyway, so out in Myanmar, different experiences in the Middle East, Southeast Asia. It's been an amazing journey looking at what we've done in parts of Europe, but also looking at what's happened in Africa. So I think I've understood certain cultural biases. I remember some markets in Germany, we were trying to do a deal with one of the phone companies owned from the German country, and they said we would never, ever give our data to an African company. So you have two choices. You either get upset or you figure out what you must do to turn this thing around and still get the business. And so I'll talk about some of that stuff tonight. If I forget, just ask in the Q&A. This is known information, but let's talk about it a little bit. So 160 seed-backed tech companies. By the time you get to the 6th round of funding, literally only 7 of them, 4%, are still around, right? So the ones that eventually get to an M&A type of exit on the 6th round, 1%, dead or self-sustaining, 4%. And this is by the 6th round of funding. Most people hardly even get to the 3rd round. And we will spend some time hopefully talking about what happens, what causes this to happen, what causes us not to get past a certain point. And if you're seeing a continent without any deals, then it means the appetite for people to fail. I remember giving a talk together with the founder of Box in LA, and this guy had failed 6 times, and 6 times the same people kept backing him up. My first company I failed, and I had to hide from Kenyans because the notion in Kenya is if it goes bad, and I had borrowed some money from some friends from Central, and I can tell you, Central money is not good for Fintech. That's on a light note if you're from Central. So a startup is a temporary organization used to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. Steve Blank, his thoughts on this. Eric Rice, I like this better. Startup is a human institution designed to deliver new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. I promise you, no entrepreneur in this space knows what in the world they're doing. But I think we fake it until we make it. But there's hope in the data, the stuff we look at. But to understand whether transactions would happen, so we saw the weirdest things. We would go into a market. We had a market called Cameroon. And, I'm glad to see some of my former employees here so they know I'm testifying the truth. So in Cameroon, everybody dismissed it. Nobody wants to go there. And we put a flag in Cameroon. Cameroon turned out to be one of our best markets ever. And I can't tell you why. I can't tell you. Swaziland happened to be an amazing market, while Niger happened to be a horrible market for us. Actually, when we raised our second round, India we were just about to put flags in India. And so telcos in India, 120 million subscribers, 70 million subscribers. And we knew if we're doing this much volume in Kenya, imagine what's going to happen in India. So the investors put in money, and India has never made us a rupee. And, different patterns you're going to experience as you build your business. So in the third one I'm looking at, it's a completely different understanding of what's more important, scale or depth. Which one do you build first? M-pesa can be sold for a couple of $1 billion. And people in 30 countries cannot see even the light of day in some of that kind of valuation. So I started looking at things differently around how do you bring valuation to its, to the place. So you could service a local market. You can service the world with fintech because the world's become a village. But this is really what startups are. So startups, in my view, are outsourced R&Ds, okay? And they involve ideas, hard work, launches, growth. And in the last 5 years, there have been 38,135 early stage startup financings of experiments. And the understanding of this is that it's no longer expensive to be a startup. So, what motivates your organization? Is it a fear of missing out? Or is it a fear of getting screwed? Screwed is an okay word for a pastor to use, I hope. But what motivates? Because the two motivations are going to are going to take you to the path you want to grow and what you want to do. So one of the problems I had is, we had to put flags everywhere. If you don't put a flag, your competitor is going to put a flag. So we worked out of fogs so much. And at the same time, I want to speak to large organizations, because I know there are some of you here from, large banks. And I remember giving a talk in Singapore. There were 3 of us. On my right side was the group COO of Deutsche Bank, and on my left was the group COO of Citibank. And each of them had a presentation. I've never been to a more intimidating talk, because I had no idea why I was invited, but they paid for the tickets. But I sat there and they started their talk and they said, well, we have a book of $2.72 trillion in assets. And I'm like, oh God. And and then the guy on my left, I said, bankers first. He introduced himself and said, we handle a book of $22.7 trillion in assets. And it's extremely intimidating, because a lot of these guys, just gigantic and big. And who are you? I'm Mod. I'm Mod. We are a fintech group, and I stayed out of numbers, but I talked about the future, and I found a way around it. But the truth is, a lot of people take comfort in where they are, and I don't think there's anything more dangerous in our time than getting comfortable. So this is the mindset I heard a lot of times with groups that had a fear of getting screwed, how they talk. Big companies, they say, they don't have our balance sheet. Don't worry about them. Our brand is trusted. Supply chain is complex. These guys will never catch it. That's our advantage. I hear that a lot here. This is a highly regulated industry. We've been doing this for 140 years. Yep. Clients trust us. They won't trust some startup. If this is how your team thinks, you're in trouble, because disruption is inevitable. And there are things coming. What we like to do as entrepreneurs is find such people and just irritate the living daylights out of them every day by making sure we innovate in their space. So one of the places I'm having a lot of fun disrupting is the banking industry. And I know there are bankers here tonight, so forgive me for what I'm about to say, but we are having fun taking your lunch any which way we can. Why? Because when you have such a mindset, so a lot of large organizations that are conscious about this are growing by acquisition, right? People are growing bottom line by acquisition, growing by EBITDA, growing by balance sheet of another company. So Mode has just gone through an acquisition. It's clear for us it's an acquisition that has happened because another group wants to grow its EBITDA. We have a good EBITDA. It just made sense for them because they will not have our growth, but at the same time, there are things we need to understand about why this is not a good mindset to have. So your response to disruptive emerging threats will be driven by your organization's personality, and in most cases, your CEO's personality. Are you playing defense or are you playing offense? Whichever one you choose is actually going to be the direction your organization eventually takes. And we like playing with the Fogs guys because they just have so much fear that they're not looking at the assets they have and what they can grow. So these startups might fail. A lot of startups will fail. A lot of startups will not meet your criteria. But those are not the ones you should worry about. What you should worry about is the ones that survive. They're the ones that become the problem. So Walmart will understand exactly what I'm talking about because they don't have our balance sheet. I had some pictures. I just didn't want to do death by PowerPoint tonight, but I had some pictures of Amazon, the first desk that Jeff Bezos has and how he's grown with that. Nobody saw Jeff Bezos coming. I lived in the US, and while we were there, Barnes & Noble and, some of these bookshops, that's all they said. Look at our stock. No one can ever replace this stock. Well, today they're all under. And because people have thought through how to get out of that space of being assumed and continue to grow. But it does sadden me that I don't think we have that full understanding yet on this continent. It's there, it's coming, but I think we need to get a lot more aggressive, because it's clear there's a lot of attention coming to this continent. There's a lot of trials, there's a lot of experiments, but at the same time, I think the fact that we have a disjointed regulatory environment, as much as Africa is a continent of 1 billion people, so we as a company had to go to every country to set up. Whereas a competitor in China just has to set up with one regulator and have the advantage of speed and growth. I have to deal with a Nigerian regulator, and I have to deal with a Ghanaian regulator, and then I have to go to Zambia and be nice, and then I have to go to Uganda, and in some of these places, they don't like Kenyans, or they don't like this, and so before you know it, the amount of time you spend on legalities is one of those things that I'm so happy to see what we're calling RegTech, reg innovation, basically regulatory innovation, where you're giving regulators a bit of a hard time, and I know we're going to have a talk tonight with regulators, giving regulators a bit of a hard time in understanding how do you regulate what's up? How do you regulate what's not within the confines of your regulatory framework? How do you regulate the unregulatable? And so this is what's exciting, because then it's forming what I'd call a unified global understanding that the marketplace and the fintech market is truly becoming a village. It means I can be in Kenya and innovate for Bank of America. And ladies and gentlemen, I think that's fabulous, because the moment we can do that, the moment I can pilot sitting in Nairobi for somebody sitting in Finland, I think fintech provides you with an opportunity not to necessarily, because let me tell you the truth, for those of you who want to go and innovate on M-pesa, there's a line of 2,000 people like you. And everybody used to come and ask me, Julian, why don't you work with Safaricom? And I remember when I first went to meet Michael Joseph, the first days, we're good friends now, but when I went to meet him the first days, Michael just gave me a look, like, whose boy are you? He just gave me a look. I just knew, and he's like, look, this thing you want to do, it's great, it's fabulous, this idea, and I have this understanding of ideation, because I hear this a lot with Kenyans, especially as an innovator. We have to be very careful, within African environments. In Nigeria, we've been sued 100 times by people who wrote on a foolscap and went and patented an idea that was already in the market for 2 years, and then they find you and say, this was my idea, was on my foolscap. So we understood that world. So Michael was looking at me like, you want to do this and then go out there and say you did it and then come back and make life hard for us. So we never really did anything. But it was very clear, when you work with a giant like that, then you better find out where your resources are best utilized. So the answer I'd give people is Safaricom does have about, I really don't know how many customers Safaricom has. Does anyone know? Okay, see, you don't know. So there are many. But the same amount of energy and time it takes me to close a deal with Safaricom is the same amount of energy and time it takes me to close Ooredoo Indonesia with 124 million subscribers. So when you think about the resources you have, which is time and energy, in the fintech world, you have to figure out where in the world will you allocate that time. I didn't think that countries that far were welcome to our innovation, but you will be shocked that they are hungry. I remember, one group that made us a proposition, and if I have time, I'll tell you about the nightmares of running a fast-growing company. So we became so good at doing one thing that we couldn't do anything else. And that's a dilemma you will find with growth. The moment you become a very good factory line at making shoes, you'll have a very hard time making omelets. And pivoting becomes very difficult when you've got a team whose job and whose training and whose understanding is just keep making this thing. Pivoting is very difficult when you're making money. Pivoting is very easy when nothing is working. So you'll find turning your ship can become easy when things are not necessarily too concrete. So Gojek in Indonesia, a group that has over 250,000 motorbikes, Ubers, but on motorbikes, had one problem. What was our business in mode? We were lending small amounts of cash, right? $1, $2, 50 cents, and profitably. Across the entire continent, our bad book was less than 1%. So, and as you heard, last year alone, we did over $800 million worth of lending. Less than 1%. Even Nigeria, less than 1%. So we cracked the understanding of small money. And the understanding I had was small money is good. And the future has a lot to do with small money, because small money is convenience. I go to the movies, I want small money. I go on iTunes, I'm not looking for $5,000, so I'm not competing with the existing bank infrastructure. But when I go to iTunes, $1 can get me 1 million different things if I have time to check all the things available for $1. So Gojek just wanted us to find a solution, because every day they had a deficit of $4 million worth of fuel. Their riders would run out of fuel. That was the biggest problem they had. And, I saw it. I sat there, I saw it. And I went to my shareholders and I went to my board and I said, well, guys, I think we need to do something with this, because I did the math very quickly. The gas station, the owners of the particular institution that would be the gas station, I don't want to name the company, was ready to give us a 3.5% discount for all these motorbikes going there and fueling every day when they run out. It's simple math. $4 million or $5 million by 3% with the possibility of a 0% bad book. Build a system. And I remember coming back to our team and saying, this is something we have to do. I want a silo team. And then you sit with your board, and your board is like, we are making money here. Don't dare change the way this is working. And the frustration you have, the frustration of innovators with governance is simply this. I don't think every innovator is good with governance, right? I've been invited to 100 boards. I can't handle board meetings. I'll just be honest with you, right? I get bored at board meetings. and it's understanding your strengths. So I understand I must couple myself with a strong governance person. So these are the challenges. And so you start missing out on very good business because you become very good at one thing. So you must understand your dynamics and what you're building and how you will pivot if you have to pivot, when to pivot, because that's critical, right? So this is where I was coming to. Startups used to cost a lot of money. But now, by 2011, people used to invest $5 million in companies to start. With $2,000 now, you could start a very good business. It's no longer expensive to start. No longer expensive. So the struggle is real. But most people think that it's big bank versus big bank. And today I want to dispel this theory. It's not Godzilla versus King Kong. This is what a lot of groups worry about. But my understanding of how we take advantage is, and it's become very hard to stay at the top. It's become very competitive. Rupert Murdoch said something. He said that where the world is right now, big will not beat small. Fast will beat slow. How quickly do I execute? How grand is this idea? And I'll talk about ideologies if I get a few minutes. But how quickly do you execute? That's really what matters. And so to the big boys who are here tonight, and big girls, it's a new frontier. It's death by 1,000 cuts. It's you having your $2.3 trillion getting eaten every day, slowly. And everybody biting at it until finally, my father is here. My father was a banker in the 70s. It was fun to be a bank manager in the 70s. They were big people. They were very big people. They would enter a county and be welcomed by the DO. If you're alive to know what a DO is, you're not youth. And they would have homes and chefs and whatever. And today I go with my dad to the bank, and he can't understand how a bank manager has like a little closet at the corner. It upsets him. He says, what have they done to banking? Death by 1,000 cuts. The Forex business is changing. Bitcoin, as much as people may talk and have interesting views about it, the underlying technology of Bitcoin, which is blockchain, is not going away. It's not going away. The movement of money, the understanding of what some of these free chats mean as far as money movement is concerned, this is where RegTech is going to get very interesting, where people can actually shift $1,000 without a worry from a WhatsApp chat to a person who is in an entirely different country, and finding out how regulation is going to start to deal with that. It's happening already. There are tests going on. So how do you continue to have a Treasury Department that is not up to terms with what's happening globally? In Nigeria, you cannot take money out of the country through a Western Union. You can only receive it. But some of these regulations are going to get disrupted. And when that happens, I don't think a lot of banks, you can use regulation to protect yourself as much as possible. We can use regulation, which is good. I'm not against it. But RegTech is something that we can't ignore. Reg innovation is something we can't ignore. It's happening. Telcos blocked out, in some countries, WhatsApp blocked out Google. If we did anything with Google and went to a telco, they would want to cancel our contract. There was a real fear of getting screwed with the telcos thinking this is going to be cannibalized. Well, the truth is, like it or not, it's a nightmare that's coming. But should you stay where you are? And that's why I have an admiration for Safaricom, because I don't look at Safaricom anymore as a phone company. I just think it's a company with a phone license. And they've started innovating the living daylights out of, what they have. So, Jamie Dimon, this is JP Morgan Chase & Company CEO. And he says, Silicon Valley is coming. There are hundreds of startups with a lot of brains and money working on various alternatives to traditional banking. They are very good at reducing the pain points, right? These are digital banking startups. Banks, disruption is coming. Actually, you are the only final frontier that has not yet been disrupted. And that's why every one of us who's in the innovation space is trying to figure out how to disrupt you and smile while doing it. Global VC-backed digital banking finance trends from Q3 17 to Q3 18. If you look at Q3 2018, 226 million USD, just banking startups that are just starting to crop up, right? So people are investing a lot in trying to figure out how will the next generation bank. Let's look at that real quick. So some demographics. When it comes to financial services, millennials think differently. When a particular bank comes to me and has prepared very nice coffee and premier stuff for me, or did I say premier stuff? Oops. Has prepared very nice things for me. That's fine for me who's no longer youth. But the habits are very different for these guys. And if you're not thinking about them, something is coming to disrupt how they're being banked. So 40% of these guys would consider banking with Google. The one disruption that you all need to worry about is not the one you see every day. It's not m-pesa. They say Apple has over 690 million credit cards stored on its database. If Apple and Google move to get banking licenses, that's real disruption. And every innovator is going to start going into their space to see how they innovate on top of such a platform. So what should banks do? Actually, I don't know. Invest in fintechs. 59% think that financial products are not targeted at them. And 79% view relationship with their bank purely as transactional, right? And 18% switched from their primary bank in the past 12 months. Millennials do think differently. And they are the majority in the world, except in the United Kingdom. Regulators across the world, and Kenyans, please hear this, across the world, regulators are changing regulation to suit fintech. So if you're building here clouding your solutions doesn't mean you have to give solutions to Africa only. And some of the ways you will be able to move fast is by being able to show your diversification. So in the third business I'm working on now, I'm happy to pilot here, but I'm very clear some of the things I will do differently. But we'll discuss those at a different time. But look at that. South China Morning Post says Hong Kong Monetary Authority announces details on its virtual bank licenses. Virtual banking in Hong Kong. Fintech regulations in Chile. Chile is one of the most advanced fintech zones I know of. A lot of our competitors came from Chile. Brazil cuts interest rates to new record low of 6.5. So there's a lot of this happening. That looked like a nice slide to have, but I don't know what it was for. So you think it's a tech industry thing. It's not. It's not. And I just put this slide there deliberately to show you that Airbnb, this is not a tech industry thing. It's disrupting every area. And, you know, it's a kind of disruption where people who don't own any hotels start to have higher valuations than groups that are putting hotels all over the world. And, you know, from Airbnb to Uber, I don't want to talk about Uber tonight, but if you start to look at some of these trends, it's just a matter of time. And so the very core understanding is that you did not need to be in the US to invent Airbnb, but you could smartly use regulation across the world to do things from here that start to work for other markets, okay? So insurance is another group. Yesterday I was having coffee with one of the insurance gurus in this country, very large insurance company, admitted we don't know what we are doing. Very few people are using insurance. How do we disrupt that area? And so I want to say tonight with boldness that banking, insurance, millennials are going to shift how they consume a lot of these products. And if those products could be put out there for as little as possible, I don't think Microsoft ever thought that there would be a day that they're selling their products for $7. I don't think they ever thought that day would come. But they pivoted quickly. They didn't pivot on product, but they pivoted on their sales strategy. And so now, what would be something that all of us had to go and hire keys for is something that people are realizing, I don't need to do that. What does that mean for the movie industry, the entertainment industry, in terms of just where things are going? So that's insurance data. And so what I see across the world is that for fintech companies, it's lunchtime. We need to prepare ourselves, especially, I'll tell you this, I did travel the world. There are far and few minds, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to any other nation, but Kenya has some amazing minds. There are some things we need to work on, but there are some amazing minds in this country. Innovation from an innovative perspective. And also I know capital, everyone's going to come and talk about capital. I showed you $2,000 is now enough to actually start making something that people could start recognizing. You just need to know how to tell your story, okay? So this continent that a lot of the world can fit in, it's a good place to start. You have a lot going on in Africa. So we, just to give you an idea, I'm now sitting on a board of a group that has just concluded this year alone doing over $1.8 billion worth of transactions. And they're not even 6 years old. And, you know, when I was invited to this board, I started looking at just what they want to capture. Amazing, amazing idea. Young Kenyans that are just doing amazing stuff. But their understanding is clear. They're going for the world. They're not just going for Africa. Their next stop is the Philippines. And they've built what they believe has enough capacity to be welcomed in that part of the world. Yeah? So the one caution I have is we must also move from a sense of entitlement. In looking at different ideas that would come across desks, innovator desks, people that want money for their funding, we have to train and teach our entrepreneurs and innovators around how to actually position ourselves for global investment. So nobody owes us anything. And I promise you, as much as we are excited about m-pesa, I remember being in New York in the middle of what you call we were going through some investment, forum, and we were sitting on this roadshow in New York, and my co-founder and I started telling them, we come from M-pesa country. I said, what? M-pesa country. They don't know what M-pesa is. What excites us is not necessarily going to work anywhere in the world. I can point to you countries that have tried to launch M-pesa and have had to shut it down. Sometimes we don't know why it works and why it doesn't. I think Michael Joseph called us peculiar. There are things that will work in Kenya. I can tell you from trials we did that will not work anywhere else, and things that will work everywhere else. So study your market and just move away from thinking because anything has worked here that it will work there, but understand how to raise the capital. Take some time to understand how Series A, Series B type capital works. There's a lot of capital that has started finding its way here. There's a lot of people wanting to put money into ideas and into ideation. How do you do that? How do you walk step by step? How do you build that entity to have that global impact you want it to have? If you just want to build it in Kenya and have impact here from a social perspective, that's great. If you want to conquer the world, you need to position yourself in a specific way. So just move away from thinking that anybody owes you anything but money to build your business. I had to get a co-founder who loves being on boards. I mean, he loves being on boards. He's like a board man, and I'd be like, Joseph, how's the board meeting going? Because I can't handle boards, but you must have governance. You cannot go to certain levels without the right governance and structures. So I just told him, find the money, I'll spend the money. Find the money, I'll spend the money. And this is not going to happen out there. The world is not fair. The world is not fair. So fold up your sleeves and be ready. I remember in Indonesia, we were up against a global giant. The tender was done. Yeah, trust me, there are tenders in Indonesia. The tender was done and came down to two players, which was us, this Kenyan company, and they did everything. They said, how can you trust a Kenyan company with data? And you've done everything you can do. But guys, some things are cosmetics. Understanding how to register in the right parts of the world and operating from Kenya and working your tax right. Is that clock demonic? Okay. All right. So those are the things that you need to just look out for. So how do I get it done? For me, I see it. I have to kind of hear it. I have to get a vibe for it. This is going to work. And then I'm going to put it to a very cheap test, right? And that's how I know the stuff I'm working on right now. It excites me, not because of any other reason, but I just feel this is it, I just feel this is it. This is the thing. This is the one I've been waiting for all these years. And you test it. It works smoothly. It's got some things here and there, but you just get this gut that this is it. But the question is, where do I launch it? And so, depending on the stage you're at, you may say, I must launch in Kenya. And that's great. But I think for fintech, the world is a village. And you don't owe your relatives any making it certificates. Go and launch where your business makes most sense for you to grow this thing and become who you have to become. If it's Brazil, then do Brazil. You will be amazed how many people are ready for Kenyan innovation. So then think, integrate. Who do you partner with for scale? Yeah, there's this fear in Kenya. Oh, people are going to steal my idea. Yeah, that's part of the game. I found out that doesn't matter. What matters is your execution, your prowess, your speed. There will be 5,000 people in China trying your innovation tomorrow after you announce it. So what you have to get good at is your execution and your speed of growth and what you need to do. And then watch on your costs. One of the big mistakes I made was as you grow too fast, you kind of want to hire the world. But I look back and realize you could actually build an amazing fintech company with very few people. Very few. And there's groups sitting on the advisory board of Africa is talking. Just the stuff these guys are being able to do for software developers. I think banks should not be in the business of building R&D departments anymore. I think R&D should be outsourced. if you want to stay consistent in what you do what you do best. And bankers, don't get me wrong, you're just not very good at innovating. So outsource. Take advantage of this next generation. Let your R&D, and I sit on that board with actually the CEO of a bank, and so we were talking and laughing at our last advisory a weekend ago, and we were saying, it's amazing. He just sat there and said, I can't believe this is, because it was our first board, so advisory, so he couldn't believe what these guys do. And he said, you know what, on Monday morning, I'm calling my entire R&D team and telling them to shut it down, that I'd rather take this entire thing and put it in the hands of people that know what they're looking at and what the next generation is looking at. So banks, you can get involved in areas you never thought you'd make revenue in. You could get involved all the way on the retail side. You could get involved all the way on music. You can make money. Forget the merchant fees. You can make money on a bag of unga. And these young people know how you can participate on a side you never thought you would be able to participate in. So learn to adapt. I had to throw this out there. Check out, what are people investing in? Why are they investing in it? What's Visa acquiring? What did they acquire last year? This kind of also helps me get a feel when I look at fintech, what areas to get into in Africa. What's American Express investing in? Blockchain, commerce, verification, payments. Where is MasterCard acquiring? Mobile commerce, blockchain. You see that? Blockchain. These guys are making investments. Don't be fooled. Something is coming. So I used tonight to say everything is getting unbundled. People are unbundling travel. People are unbundling the hotel. People are unbundling Procter & Gamble. And all this unbundling is the small cuts I'm talking about. Where do you want to play? Where is that consumer element looking? And how do you make that work small? Because small is powerful. So I think I'm pretty much done. So I'm happy to share this, but I believe without data, you are just another person with an opinion. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tonight. I appreciate your time.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tamara Cook, and I'm the head of digital innovations at FSD Kenya. Following this excellent lecture, thank you so much, Julian, we've pulled together a few panelists to help us reflect on what it is we've learned. And by way of introduction, I'd like to ask each of the panelists, I'll introduce them briefly and ask each of them one question, and then we'll just open it up. And then after that, we'll open it to the audience. So be thinking about what your questions are tonight. Great, so let's see, maybe Josephine, I'll start with you. So Josephine Kang'ong'a is the head of regulatory framework at the Capital Markets Authority. She's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and studied law in Kenya and the United Kingdom and practiced state law here in Kenya. I first met her when the Capital Markets Authority announced that it would be launching, potentially launching a regulatory sandbox for capital market fintechs. And so I thought she'd be a great addition to this panel. So Josephine, could you start with telling us, why did the Capital Markets Authority think that it might be a good idea to launch a regulatory sandbox for fintech for capital markets?
Thank you, Tamara. So probably for the benefit of those who may not be aware of what a regulatory sandbox is, this is a safe space in which businesses can test their innovative ideas without immediately incurring the regulatory and financial consequences of undertaking that activity. So I think, as from Julian's presentation, what you saw is that for startups, so the sandbox is aimed both for startups and incumbents, but then I think for startups, they operate in an area of great uncertainty, and for regulators, it's the other way. So we want to be certain that before we bring a product to market, then we understand the risks. But we realized with the pace at which technology is evolving, then we would not be able to follow that traditional model. And so the purpose of the sandbox is actually to allow firms to come in. They come in with their innovative products, and while they are in the sandbox, then we can assess the implications of that without necessarily smothering them with rules, but at the same time, we are also able to ensure that there is investor protection.
Great, thanks, Josephine. And Julian had lots to say about regulators, so I'm sure we'll come back to this. The next panelist is Eddie Ndichu. He's currently the managing director of Opera Software in Kenya. which launched the Okash loan app you may be familiar with. Eddie has had a wide-ranging career across the financial sector. We might call him a reformed banker at this point. With KCB, he headed the digital area. And Eddie, as you think about your career in the financial sector and also outside of the financial sector, what do you think about what's happening and what's going to happen here in FinTech?
Thank you. That's a good question. Hi everyone. I want to say, that was a very good presentation, a very good lecture from Julian. I hope everyone enjoyed it. For purposes of everyone, Opera Software, you all know it as Opera Mini, but now opened up its offices here in Kenya, with myself as being the first employee in Africa. So very great presentation on this subject, on the future of FinTech, the future of financial services, the future of FinTech, and what does it look like. I'm always very careful in all my interactions with people not to have that conversation, because I remember 12 years ago being in a conversation and leading a team against m-pesa. And as bankers, we were very strategic in making sure that a telco should not come into our space. Long story short, we lost that fight. So I'm very careful with this topic about what does the future look like, and as you said, my history coming from banking. What we try to do is try and transform banks and try and change the original premise of banking. The original premise of banking is to develop trust. And when you need to develop trust, you need to develop institutions. The unfortunate thing with, or the fortunate thing with FinTech today, they're not building institutions, they're building platforms. They're building very good technologies. And then once they build very good technologies, they know how to manage consumers. So those are two things that banks are not very good at. Building technology and managing consumers, or building for consumer tech. So we started this notion of FinTech in banking back then when when banks were trying to see how do we offer more convenience, how do we offer more ease. We built channels, mobile, ATM, online. But now I've quickly moved away from that area into something I call TechFin. I believe it's Jack Ma on this very stage who coined that phrase, TechFin. An institution that has been building technology for a long time that now decides, I want to try financial services. This is from you'd never think a browser would build a lending service, right? Because that's what Opera is. So we're now significantly in the TechFin area, and they have significant advantages that traditional financial services don't have. So today, I sit back and look at the history of Kenya and the successes we've had, and I'm very excited that we have one thing I always comment, the benefit of hindsight. Not very many African markets have the benefit of hindsight. The experiences we've had with the success, even though largely offline, because m-pesa is still an offline platform, believe it or not. And that's what's exciting, the migration from offline to online. I remember joining an internet company, Opera, and I'm wondering, why do they need me for? Am I going to sell ads? But one thing they've opened up and made me understand is a lot of this technology, a lot of these companies that Julian has spoken about are largely built on the internet. So the exciting part about the future is that all this success has been offline. I mean, today, even on offline, you can send money from your m-pesa to the rest of the world with a recent product by m-pesa Global Services. But that's still significantly offline. So the exciting part is about this area moving onto online, where you can actually be more secure, you can actually start beginning to collect significantly more data. And that's not a bad thing, to collect data. And that's what I see as the most exciting part about the future and what's happening here.
Great. Let me introduce our final panelists, and then we can start reflecting a bit more on this lecture. Kamal Bhattacharya is currently an entrepreneur, a startup entrepreneur, with a company called MojaChat, which is exploring the world of human-powered, AI-assisted tech to improve how we learn languages. He is also a commissioner with the Pathways for Prosperity Commission on Technology and Inclusive Development, and a senior lecturer at MIT in the US. But formerly, and probably best known in this market, he was the Chief Innovation Officer at Safaricom, And before that, he was the founder of IBM Research here in Africa, and he spent 16 years at IBM. So he's worked across the tech sector, the innovation sector in a lot of different ways. So Kamal, as you think about this wide-ranging career that you've had, what do you see as the barriers for real transformation in financial services? That's the question we prepared in advance, but if you decide you want to talk about something else, totally cool.
We've been on panels together before, I guess.
We have.
So first of all, thank you very much for this presentation, and Tamara and FSD for having me here. It's really interesting. You know, I don't really subscribe to this whole notion of disruption so much, because I find disruption to be very imprecise. And I explain I'm partly academic, right? So I like things to be in such a way that I can actually predict, especially as an entrepreneur, right? Because as you said, you chip away, but you also want to think about what is it actually that you want to chip away at, because there is the real opportunity. But I think if I take what, you know, all the things that you mentioned that we were discussing, and put it in a slightly different light, it actually becomes interesting. Think about the fact that what the financial industry and the telco industry really is, right? The one is providing you access to money, and the other one is providing you access to network assets. That's ultimately what these companies do. When you look at the growth trajectory of those industries, they are not so great, right? Because they will grow, but they will not go away either. Right? They will grow at 5%, 6%, nothing that makes shareholders, super excited, but, your kids and probably your kids' kids will work for banks and will work for telcos. They will not go away. But can they change is the question. What I question is, think about what's happening with fintech. Fintech is a whole different business altogether, right? It's not, the extension of banking with technology, right? Fintech is a new way of thinking about access to credit, access to insurances, to all of these things, facilitated through the use of technology, targeted at the consumers. If you've been a bank, then you've been a bank for the last 500 years. Your culture, your DNA is always going to be that. The organizational architecture of your company will not allow you to change into something that is so radically different. You will be as successful as a fintech player, as a traditional bank, or a telco for that matter, as you will be as a tea seller or a seller of furniture. These are also good businesses, by the way. But if your core, if your DNA is traditional banking, best you can do is try to move that 5% growth to 7% growth. But don't try to be a fintech company. So, because you will never be able to do it. If you are a telco, and yes, I've worked with Safaricom, but even for Safaricom, M-pesa is an amazing story. But to what extent will that story always stay exactly the way it is? Of course it won't, right? And Safaricom and CEO of Safaricom are keenly aware of these things. But how do you now take that ship? And you were just describing this, right? It's like, you got really good at certain things, and then all of a sudden you see another opportunity coming up. Can you quickly move when there is a steady stream of revenue coming in? The answer is not always no, because in some cases, your distribution channels is actually conducive to whatever that new innovation is. So my thing from an entrepreneurial perspective is to think about, well, is Safaricom going to be capable? Do they have the distribution mechanism to fight me on a particular innovation? Is the banking sector going to be able to fight me on a certain angle and then understand how do you cut exactly there? Because they can tell you we're big, they can give you all those great examples of how they rule the world, they will never be able to change. And this is why disruption happens, right? This is why disruption happens, because the big companies will not be able to fight. The lethargy and the inability for big organizations to change is way more dramatic than you can imagine. And I've gone through, I used to work for IBM, which is an over 100-year company, which in its DNA has sort of innovation in a way that very few other companies have, right? A tabulator machine company that transformed itself to a mainframe company that almost lost the battle in the PC time and then became a prime service provider, now transforming again into the AI world and blockchain and whatnot, right? But I've seen the transformation, I've been part of this transformation. It's really tough, and you can tell that there are certain transformations that a company may not be able to make. And that's the beauty, and that's the beauty of fintech, because I think all the telcos and all the banks who think they can play in fintech are smoking something funny. And I want that, because it must be good, but they're smoking something funny. They won't.
Great, so we've heard about how regulators would like to create certainty where it's not. We've heard about fintech, no, that's the wrong one, it's TechFin. And then we've heard about all sorts of good stories from Kamal. You've had a bit of time now to think about some of the slides that we saw and some of the things Julian said. Would anybody from the panel like to react to anything that you heard in the lecture? Could be something to do with FOMO versus FOGs. It could be, and there were so many great quotes, but would anybody?
Can I maybe just start and say that if I hear one more entrepreneur telling me how scary it is, it's like, can some entrepreneur tell me, it's a smooth ride? Because
says the new entrepreneur.
The only entrepreneurship article I read is that recently circulated one that actually says that the average age of entrepreneurs is more my age than your guys' age, right? So it's like, that makes me feel better, right? No, but I really appreciate, because you kind of, I thought Julian did a great job in sort of creating almost like a random walk through many different aspects of the space and put them into context really nicely. With each one of them, I think you clearly express a sense of urgency in terms of the entrepreneurial community, especially here in Kenya, to think global and to think bigger, and not to shy away from saying, we should get a $2 million seed A fund. Why not? Or Series A fund. We should think as big, we have as global as an opportunity. The question is, we need to learn how to position ourselves and bring the talent and the ideas out into a global market, which will accept them. I spend a lot of time outside of Kenya, and I always see how relevant the things are that we build here, but we need to develop more entrepreneurs that have the guts to just go out there and say, look, this is as great an idea as anyone else's.
Eddie, any reactions?
Yes, it was a great presentation, and I think one thing that stood out is the concept of startup. I don't think everyone can start a business. Let me just start from there, because I get a lot of questions, especially from a lot of engagements I have on LinkedIn, on social media, or conversations like these. So fintech is hot. It's something exciting, but it seems like all that's available to do is either you start it or you get a top job. So there's a lot of people who want to get into fintech, and there are no open doors, or there's no understanding of what's the entry level point. So I'll speak about the entrepreneurial side first, and I think I changed my opening speech and wanted to include the benefits of hindsight. No part of the world has the kind of experience Kenya has when it comes to mobile payments, even though they're offline. And it's happening around you here in Kenya. This is knowledge, and what I jumped out from Julian's presentation, that can be transferred across the world. And what he's done with his business to take something as simple as a microcredit, but in all fairness, you were doing it before we all figured out what it was, going into Indonesia, Philippines, and being bold enough to start a business or even start a service with in partnership or a company, but basically seeing how can you get that benefit of hindsight, the knowledge you have and exposure and experience that you get out of Kenya and taking it outside to the rest of the world. That was my key takeout. For those also who may not be fortunate to start a business or a fintech, put yourself around the environment of people who are having the conversation around fintech, around the internet. Those founders, involve yourself with them, because you still need to learn, quite a bit of learning on exactly what they do, what is it they do, why is it they think that way, why do they believe that the financial industry could be better, and from there you could start working together and you could find your way or entry into fintech.
Josephine, as you get the mic, one of the things that Julian said was, how do you regulate the unregulatable? He said some other things about regulation, but what were some of your reflections or thoughts?
From a regulator's point of view, I think what was interesting from Julian's presentation was his emphasis on the right structures and governance, because I think most of the time when we engage with some of the startups, they have a good idea, they want to take it up, but I think when it comes to, there's a challenge in terms of the structures that they put in place, and I think as he emphasized, it's important in terms of scalability. So when to move into a larger scale, then it's important to have the right structures and governance in place. And in terms of regulation, I think that is related to what we're saying in the sandbox. I think that is where we have to test the product first, because it enables us also to assess what is happening, the implications of that product, and also to understand what regulations need to be in place so that we are not over-regulating the sector, because we may also lock out some transformative innovations. So I think that is the way to go, that to learn, because I think some of the areas, once we understand, they may not need any regulation, but I think also as a regulator, the key mandate is investor protection. So it's just, and being able to strike a balance between the two.
Great. I know we started a bit late, but it might be good to get a few questions from the audience now. Are we set up for that? Great. So if you've got a question, maybe raise your hand. It looks like there's some mics that are moving around. Why am I not surprised?
Hi, this is DJ for the ones that don't know me. Thanks very much everyone for chiming in. I could be very lame and regurgitate my question from last year, this time directed to Eddie Ndichu, to ask him how does it feel to start yet another electronic loan shark, but I'm not going to go there. Instead, Julian, interesting slide you had on the changing patterns from millennials. If I compare that then with, say, some interesting observations from Simon Sinek about different expectations from millennials being, say, less patient, driven by technology, the attention span of a goldfish, and wanting to make an impact. How do you match these two? So from the workspace versus the customer space.
Great. And just push the button, Julian.
Hi, DJ. Good to see you. Millennials are going to grow up, right? Actually, statistics show the most stubborn generation since the 1900s were the baby boomers. so there's this big vibe about millennials. There's just many, but they are growing, and they are actually good consumers. They're great givers. They're understanding charity better than any, and I know that from the charity world, they're understanding charity better than anyone else, humanity better than any other generation. So, but they are very particular about certain things. So there is a lot said about millennials, but they are also great consumers. They're great consumers, in my view, of little. That's why I'm very big on little, right? How do you bring out the very selective? So instead of me buying an entire album, I'll have a system that enables me to buy one song out of an entire album. Didn't happen in our time. I had to buy the whole down tape and keep forwarding with a pen till the song I wanted to play. So we have to innovate for people because we have to innovate for consumers. So unfortunately for innovators and anyone making consumer products, you do have to make consumer products according to the patterns of the people that exist at that time. I don't know what millennials' children will be like. I'm having a nightmare with my children right now. I don't know what the millennials' children will look like, because that's an even faster generation, right? I don't know if they're going to be ordering things off of VR. So Walmart, for instance, has had to realize that that next generation is actually more communal, ironically, and move away from the big store phenomenon back to the small community store and start placing those closer to homes, because that generation is not going to drive 20 miles out to a big store. They want to be closer to community. So shifting your organization to morph to the need of an ever-changing society. I'll throw this out there just to sound smart. In 1800, right, they said that the information right now in the New York Times in one day is more than 100 years of information someone who lived in 1800s had access to in one day. So this is a much more informed generation. They know what they want earlier, and so we have to innovate. And I think telcos, as you know, Kamal was talking about that. I wanted to hug him, but at the same time realize, look, the problem for great networks and giants is understanding the next phase, the next jump. And I think the smart ones tend to grow by acquisition, appreciating that they themselves cannot change. Find those who have adapted to those change, bring them on board. That was one of IBM's big strategies, was constant growth by acquisition. So I'd say to that about that generation, I think banking is going to be very different for them. I don't think they're not going to bank, but banking will be very different for them. Consuming services like telco will be very different for them. And that's why I think innovation in that area maybe not change the assets that people have already put in place, but Kamal, you know, the next, unless I didn't see the right thing, but I did see that the 5G, the new 5G, and DJ, you're in this industry, the new 5G gadget is about the size of my hand. What does that mean for all these towers and masts that everyone has put out for the last 50 years, and people who invested? It's the size of this glass and can stick on any wall anywhere, and you have 5G. Licenses are about to start being sold if the regulators allow them to come in. But this is what I'm talking about, that I could invest $1 billion in a company with assets, and next year the asset is worthless or outdated for all, you know, that we care for. So those are the things and patterns we have to understand are going to change. So I think you have to adapt to that generation because they have the numbers. You just have to. Do we have another question? Right here.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Mark Ambito, running a company called Mobile for Good. My question is basically to Julian and to my friend who was the innovation manager of Safaricom. In any country in the world, the forerunners normally come up to be mentors of the startups. There's a question that has perplexed Kenyans, but nobody has spoken the truth about it. The question of m-pesa. Who actually discovered m-pesa? Is it Vodafone of the UK which designed it and leased it to Kenyans, Safaricom, which is paying royalty to Vodafone? So it came from the UK. Secondly, to Julian. I had a product. I had a fintech product. And then, you know, if you have a fintech product, you must talk to the telcos. There's one thing you have to do first. They give you a legal binding document that you sign to partner with them. In the legal document, there are two phrases which are very tricky. One says, the company could be in the process of developing whatever you've given to them. So in case they're already in the process, you have no redressal against them. And what they have with them at that time. It's you who is giving them, so you don't know what they have in their closet. Secondly, they tell you that if one of the marketing team takes off with the idea, you have no redressal against this company. This is very tricky for startups because you know the Kenyan scenario. A lot of actually ideas have been poached and people have gone with them. Made so many startups fear to approach the telcos with innovative ideas. As you who actually succeeded, how did you go about this? Thank you for those two questions.
Julian, do you want to take that? You already talked a little bit about it, execution and implementation. Do you want to talk about how important that is?
Yeah, let me talk about that very quickly before we get Kamal in trouble on the Safaricom side. But from an ideation perspective, I agree. It's a rough world. It's not a Kenyan problem. You find that same kind of documentation in the Philippines. You'll find it in Indonesia. People are protective. And I understand because they're a giant, they're targeted. And the truth is, ideas are everywhere. So what we were doing was not original, but we just had to prove. So my theory is, you may have the idea. I'm gonna help you do it better than you could ever execute it. Because for me, it's my day job. For you, it's a part-time product that may be on the side with some guys looking at it. So the strength you have as a team that's coming from the outside, and where we became good is we became good at what they couldn't even get themselves internally to execute at our level. So that's how I would position it, to just avoid a long story, is you'll always find that wording, you'll always find it, it's not in telcos only, you'll find it in banks, you'll find it everywhere, that we already have your idea. They're basically telling you that. What you have to do is position yourself to say, I'm gonna take this thing, make it better than you've ever made it, and take it to another level for you. Then you will get friends. But if you play defense all the time, these guys have ways they protect themselves that you can never penetrate. So you just have to find ways to penetrate by becoming friendly. After you've earned a right to be heard on the inside, then they will let you innovate new things for them. And we had master agreements that just told us, just come, whatever else you innovate, we'll just add it. Then they keep calling us, what else have you come up with? But to get there, be good at one thing, let them grow. But I'm not gonna grow another company. I'm just telling you right now, I'm not gonna grow another company. Julian's opinion, and opinion is the lowest level of knowledge. I'm not gonna grow another company depending on anyone else's customers. I think it's possible at this day and age to actually go to the next level from there. Build your own customer base. It's possible. That's just me.
So no one was on this panel was there when Safaricom was invented, but Kamal or Eddie, would you like to take that question?
I can tell you, I remember in 1997, I was taking a train ride from Frankfurt to Italy for a conference. I was a physics grad student back then. It was a long train ride. And on that train ride, I was sort of sharing a compartment with a young lady who I had never met before. And she had a cell phone, which, in 1997 wasn't super common, even in Europe where I was living at that time. And and so she was showing me the cell phone which her dad gave her, and so we spent hours on this train ride talking about how could the future look like if everyone would have such a thing. And one of the ideas that we talked about is that wouldn't it be nice if I could now go to the train cafeteria and buy myself a coffee and just pay via sending an SMS? So I think I invented m-pesa.
I like that it happened in 1997. That's great. All right.
By the way, the sad part of the story is I never met that lady again. In those days it was much harder to stay in touch.
Do we have another question? Back in the back?
I have a question.
Oh, sorry, whoever's got the mic, please talk. Yes.
Hello, my name is Mary Mwangi, and I run Data Integrated, which is actually a fintech. And my question is to the lady, the regulator. one of the things and one of the dangers that fintechs suffer in Kenya, not just in Kenya, but I'll say even in Africa, is an inconsistency in regulation. Right now, if you're looking at people that are doing micro lending or online lending, one of the things that's going on through Parliament is capping the interest rate. So you're looking at capping the interest rate where the margins that they make and the reason why they're able to finance, give out credit in this market is because the interest rates are high enough that even if they have defaulting without any collateral, they can actually make up the money. This is going to put a lot of fintechs that are in the lending space out of business. So what is it that the regulators can do to protect fintechs in terms of really reviewing what type of regulation that is coming up? I understand there's a sandbox, but more than that is you have regulators like in Parliament and all that, that probably don't have an in-depth understanding of the fintech space. Thank you.
Okay, so personally I'm from the capital markets, and I think that's an issue that cuts across, whether you're a fintech or whatever sort of a player in the market. The inconsistency of regulations, I think, cuts across everyone. And for us, it's more of engaging the policymakers, because some of these proposals, they do not come from the regulators themselves. So it's about engaging the policymakers in Parliament, as well as for the financial sector, that would be the National Treasury, so that they can understand the impact that it has on the market. So for us as regulators, that is the direction that we would take. I don't know whether that answers.
Great. I think somebody else has a mic. Is that for us?
Can I quickly just ask before I hand over to him? So the fintech space is super interesting, and that's just given the fact that a lot of things are accelerating. The pace of technology is taking us up, and it's like it's taking us up in some sort of whirlwind. So right now we're hearing stuff around the Q initiative, some sort of like currency for the future that ex-PayPal guys are trying to promote. And then that's riding on the back of, the Bitcoin and all these sorts of cryptocurrencies. So how do we make sense of all these things that are just being thrown to us, and how do we know which of these things is safe to, to engage with?
Let's go ahead and get that other question first.
Hi, my name is Patrick of Imaginarium, Patrick Awori. And I'd like to thank the panelists for an awesome conversation. So I'd like to ask a broader sort of question to summarize what I understand. I read somewhere that the reason Africa isn't where it needs to be in the context of fintech or financial inclusion is that because we are still a net consumer of technology, not a net producer of technology. And they explained that for you to create, or for you to evolve from consuming technology that's probably coming from the UK, like Vodafone or something, you have to build strong ecosystems. So my question pegged to that is that, does the relationship between the old and the new have to be so antagonistic? Using words like disruption, using words like bite-sized, like bite into your market share, or traditional. Does it have to be so cutthroat, so competitive? What we're seeing in Kenya is those inefficiencies caused by the conflict between old institutions and up-and-coming innovators. And what you have is well, banks will just be replaced by digital loan sharks, and how can we work together in the environment to build an environment that is more collaborative, that's more of a situation where we learn from each other and complement one another, and build strong ecosystems that will take us into the new generation stronger, you know, not just consuming whatever somebody, you know, brings into the market. How can you, and I'll leave it to the panelists just openly, how can we grow the industry holistically, not just in the lending space?
Julian, would you like to start?
For the first question about how do you know which is safe, which is not, the day you figure that out, let me know. You just get out there. I mean, honestly don't know how else. You have to know what you want to do and get at it. But on the part of your question, Patrick, just very quickly, yeah, I think that's an ideal world. But we do live in a cutthroat world. The day you innovate anything, there will be 100 new patents in Kenya alone of your innovation. And call it nature, you know, because if you're in the innovation space, you're not in the charity space. You're in a business space. But you are right that there are groups, especially out there, that have chosen to build more of ecosystem type of thinking. But they have made entry points competitive. So you're safe once you're inside, but how do you get in? How do you get into the largest car groups to be able to unbundle? How do you unbundle Procter & Gamble? You got to get in. How do you get in? It's competitive. I don't know any other way you get in without competing. It's just the world we're in. But again, if those ecosystems you talk about, if Citibank hold, you know, IBM held what for amazing entry point, which was the IBM Global competition. That was a way in. We got introduced to amazing groups, but guess what? It was a competition. We had to win. Then we got introduced because we won. So I don't know if there's a way around that, but I'll let maybe the rest of the panelists attempt to respond.
I just wanted to give you the counter aspect to this as well, which is, you know, I've been an inventor and innovator for the better part of the last 2 decades. I can tell you one thing, there's always somebody with a better idea. There's always somebody who had your idea before you had it. Just take it for granted. It doesn't matter, because what matters is what you do with the idea that you had, and how you execute it, how you bring it into the market, what you do in general. People will fight you left, right, and center in every kind of thing. I see this in academia, you know, where everyone is incredibly competitive, partly because the problems are so damn small, right? Nobody really cares. But everything is competitive. And I think it's actually interesting that you're bringing this out. I mean, you know, I've been in Kenya now for about 6 years. It's still, I would say, the least competitive country I've ever lived in. You know, and I lived in India before that, and in Germany, and in the US, and I think it needs to change a little, you know, because it is true. I think I completely agree with you. The world is incredibly competitive, and I wouldn't be so incredibly stuck with whose idea was it. It doesn't matter, you know, and if somebody, you know, ate your lunch, go find your next one.
Eddie, anybody? I think we're about out of time, but maybe just one last question for the panel as Joyce comes up to close us out. At the very beginning, our director David talked about how FSD Kenya, our goal is about creating value through financial inclusion. So if fintech is inevitable, what are the opportunities for fintech or techfin or whatever you want to call it to create value for Kenyans?
Sorry, let's repeat that question. It's a very good question, but I want to make sure I answer it properly.
So if fintech is inevitable, what are the opportunities for TechFin, since I'm talking to you, to create value for Kenyans?
And that's a good question. I think right at the beginning we started talking about how exciting it is this past 2 decades or 1 decade for fintech and how fast it's grown. We've seen more customers access mobile phones. We've seen mobile payments running. We've seen money running on mobile phones. And we're now significantly what I like to call the post-mobile money era. A lot of business models are coming out purely from having a very good money distribution infrastructure. And models like betting or even lending. And there are still many more models people are not thinking about. You're right, it is inevitable. But for us to be able to improve the lives of Kenyans, I believe we have to take a different perspective on these products. We shouldn't pick banking or financial products and place them on technology as they are. One article I did, I think a month ago on Business Daily was around purpose lending. Our product, Okash, is actually on beta. It's not a live product. We're still, in our view, testing, even though we have 1 million customers. But we're not testing the concept of just giving a customer money. We want to test the concept of what is the customer doing with that money, because that's more interesting. That gives you significantly more data and knowledge of this customer to understand what his consumer needs or his behaviors. But then it goes a bit further than that. If you can have all that information and data sitting on an AI infrastructure, you can start having that data work for that customer. And basic decisions like planning for an emergency, like not being able to plan for an emergency health problem in the family, or even savings. Those decisions can be made and done by technology. The consumer can get the data to work for them. So these are the benefits I see. We shouldn't copy-paste what has been done. We should be able to take the concept and understand consumers for what they really need. Consumers, for instance, we believe Kenyans don't make enough to save. I don't believe that. I think they've not just been given an opportunity to save. You look at models like betting that's thriving in this market, collecting almost 10 billion shillings a week for millions of customers. All these are models that we could learn from and try and understand how do consumers interact with their money. How do we get them to find value and add value in their lives? Something at Oprah I have to put it in there, in TechFin. We're testing this concept of streaming money because not only streaming money, but also value on the internet. Taking a different view on how Africans or globally people value money. And I think the future, since it's inevitable, we have to have those hard thoughts and hard conversations about how does money get streamed like data? How does value get stored on the internet? And that's the conversation around blockchain and decentralized ledgers.
Great. Would anybody else like to?
I just wanted to add one funny story. In 2013, in fact, I think I was at the IBM Research Lab in Karen, and I believe I was waiting for Julian, but he didn't show up. While we were waiting for him, a few team members and we were discussing this whole question of, inequality and how can we give people who, give more ownership in the things they may not be able to own. Like today, how could you how do you make an Uber driver an owner of the car, maybe not to its full extent, but you break it up, you share ownership in the assets that you actually use to drive an income, right? And drive sort of more equality in the system. While we were waiting for Julian, we were discussing this, talking about how could you part own a cow? A cow, right? So if you're a farmer and you want to get into the dairy business, how do you own a part of a cow? Which at that time, really sounded, kind of crazy, right? But it makes a lot of sense because you don't want to, and how can you digitally do that? Like how can you digitally partially own a cow? And I always remember this as one of the, most interesting discussions that I had, because unfortunately your team went off and they looked into the wrong thing, which was, how do I put a chip up the cow's ass so that I can actually measure it? Okay. But what was really interesting while waiting for Julian, now,
and on that note,
now thinking back to this, today with blockchain, right? I mean, with the concept of blockchain, forget about this cryptocurrency nonsense, but with it's about breaking down assets. It's about creating ownership, partially ownership of things, right? It's about rethinking investment. It's about rethinking funding. It's about tokenizing everything and creating ownership at a completely different, at a completely global level, instantaneously, right? I mean, if that is not groundbreaking enough and not sort of opportunity space enough, I don't know what is.
So I think from the capital market, it's more about enabling businesses to access capital and also to create a broader investment products for investors. And I think a good case in point is the m-pesa, which has allowed more people to invest in government bonds. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, value that can be created with fintech in that.
Are these closing remarks?
yes.
Okay. So I want to come back to a question a gentleman asked. Has he left? Okay. I think he did. But just as my closing remarks, I think as you innovate, you've got to deal with what's that thing you want to solve for. What is it you want to solve for? And I couldn't believe where my next road was taking me. Fine, there's the fintech side, but I got so passionate about homes. I got angry about the fact that there's 33,000 mortgages in Kenya since independence, with all these banks, and how watching m-pesa patterns, m-shwari patterns starts to tell you something about homes. And I knew that there are solutions globally by the exposure I got with the kind of capital we were able to raise, and some of that capital being very reasonable capital, some cheap money here in different parts of the world for doing good. We're in a group that's actually, we signed in New York with the government of Kenya. I don't know how I got into that stuff, but now we're building homes. But the whole tech element of these homes and what we want to do, 100,000 homes, how we're going to lay them out, funding that's already been raised, kicking off in February next year. I'm saying this to say, as you innovate, you will come across accidents, things you never thought you're going to be doing. And as you're passionate about solutions, you start to think about, small. What's the problem in Kenya? It's affordability. People are not in homes because of affordability. And I don't want to skew into another whole element. I just wanted to point out as I close that you will fall into accidents, and a lot of things that start to do amazing things for you may be accidents on the way to something you thought you were on your way to do. So you will find yourself solving for problems that you never thought you'd be solving for. But Wi-Fi in homes, Kenyans being in homes for as little as 5,000 shillings a month, the affordability scope of that, doing good by innovation is one of those things as you build. And this was from, I'm now sitting on a board of a group called Endeavor. There's a group called Endeavor in Kenya, everyone, Endeavor. I'm going to get in trouble tonight. This is the group that helped Ken Njoroge of Cellulant raise about $47 million, right? If you look at Ken's 12-year journey, Endeavor actually presented him. So I went and did roadshows on my own with my investment banker friends, trying to meet all these people across the United States. They don't know me. They don't know where. They're like, is Kenya the capital of Nigeria? They didn't know where we were. But here's another group that's come to hold hands in taking you out there to take you before people, but they take you through certain tests because they want to be able to grow you. And Ken raised about $47 million for his business. Great business. Cellulant's a great business, but I do know businesses doing more EBITDA than Ken's. I know businesses doing more profit than Ken's. Why aren't they out there? So just take a chance. You may fall into something you never thought you'd fall into, but this has been a great night and really appreciate everyone. Thanks, Tamara.
The struggle is no longer about big versus small. It's fast versus slow. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here tonight at the 4th FSD Kenya Annual Lecture on Financial Inclusion. My name is Joyce Omondi Waihiga. I lead communications here at FSD, and I'd just like to take a few moments just to really thank once again our 2018 speaker, Mr. Julian Kyula. Would you want to appreciate him again? Thank you as well to our great panel, Kamal, Eddie, Josephine, and led by Tamara. Asante sana to you guys as well. And of course, to all of you who are here tonight, thank you for coming out. We really do appreciate it. We're going to have the presentation on our website from tomorrow. The conversation still continues on the hashtag FSD lecture. And with that said, I think you are welcome to whatever refreshments that are left. But let's keep the debate going. Let's keep the conversations going. Until next time, have a good evening and see you next time. Bye-bye.